I'm Dana, and today we've got the very fun video topic of death for autistic people. I think that's the title I'm going for. I can't think of a better way to word it, to be honest with you. But I wanted to talk about the ways that autistic people experience other people's deaths and grieving and mourning and loss and so on and so forth, because it's something I've been through a handful of times, and it's something that's, you know, when you need it, it's quite well spoken about online and the like, but I didn't find a lot of the stuff online very useful as an autistic person, so hopefully someone might feel a little bit better from this video. That's the hope. Obviously, a lot of deaths are very sad, but also I can't stand the way that people talk about deceased people. I really strongly dislike the way that people are glorified, I guess, glamorized. I can't think of the word, but you know how someone dies and suddenly they were the best person I've ever met, I can't believe this has happened, never met a nicer person. And it's like, they were all right, you know? Like, to go off my own personal experiences, I had a great aunt and uncle that I don't remember all that well because they passed when I was very young, but I loved them a lot. I don't remember really my Uncle Sydney's passing and funeral, but I do remember my Aunt Sheila's, and it frustrated me a lot, even though I was like maybe 7, because people were really making this whole thing of like, she was such a good person, the way she cared for Sydney, or the way she cared for her family and she did this, or wasn't she a great person? And like, I agree, she was a great person, she was absolutely fucking brilliant, but it didn't encapsulate the way that if she wanted to buy you something and you tried to refuse her, she would give you the slap of your life, you know? Like, one of my brother's friends had done something or another that had annoyed her once, and this, like, 70-year-old lady chased him around the garden to give him a clip, you know? Like, she was hilarious, and she was filled with, like, fire, and just, she was the best person in my family, to be completely honest with you. She was absolutely fantastic. And the way they were talking about it was as though she'd done nothing more than pour some fucking tea, you know, in her entire life. Like, it completely lost everything. And that was another one that I experienced with my dad. There was a lot of family drama before my dad passed. And the moment he died, suddenly everyone was like, oh my God, he was the best dad ever. He was just incredible. He was amazing. And it was another one where I was like, yo, he was... See, it's still difficult because I want to say he was great, because in a lot of ways he was. You know, in a lot of ways he really made me the person that I am, and everyone that has a half decent dad loves their dad, you know? And I loved my dad to absolute bits. But with all the family drama that I'm not going to spill, as well as a lot of things that I went through as a teenager with my dad and the like, it was... I don't feel like I could be like, he was an amazing dad, or he was brilliant, he was the best. And I don't think that, like, really most people can do that when people die. You know, they can, they do, but it's not true. And for me, I think it's very much just, I want to remember people as they were, you know? I want their actual memory to live on, not this false conviction that you've got that they were the best person on earth, because they weren't. They were a human being. And, you know, part of what makes us all humans and part of what makes us special and unique and everything else is that sometimes we have flaws. We have bits of our personalities that are assholes, you know? One of the funniest memories from my childhood of my dad was when my brother was taking too long to get ready when we were out camping. So my dad just drove off, and my brother had to run out of a tent with like half his shoe on and pulling a sock on, and I had to run after the car, you know? And that's not something a great, amazing, perfect dad does. I'm sure there's no particularly fun memory from my brother that time that he was trying his best to get ready on time and dad drove off without him. To me, it was fucking hilarious. And that's part of what makes him and everyone else that's ever died part of who they are, you know? Sometimes they did kind of arsehole things, sometimes they were really funny, sometimes they were really kind. You know, it's this amalgamation that makes people into who they are. And I really hate that that's lost and forgotten when they pass. And I really can't stand it. So for me, a very big part of mourning my dad's passing was just talking about him to people outside of my family who I could tell the stories of, like, that time he was a total arsehole, and that time he did this thing that made me really upset, and that time he did this really amazing thing that, like, absolutely uplifted my soul and made me so happy, you know? It was really important for me to, like, pass on memories of my dad as the person that he was, and not just the perfect, amazing person everyone wants to pretend dead people are. Like, I feel like most of my grieving process for my dad was just crying and talking about him to people. But as an autistic person, once I'd done that and I'd sort of processed all of these memories of him and I'd sort of really encapsulated him as a person, I didn't feel like I had any more grieving to do. I felt like I was done, you know. I didn't need all of these stages of grief and whatever. I jumped ahead of myself a bit. So initially my dad dying was quite a shock. So I didn't believe it really. You know, I was going through the motions. We went to the hospital and we spoke to like the people that had known him in his last minutes kind of thing. And I was like, I know that they're probably not, but this kind of just feels like it's all a big joke or a big prank, or like my dad isn't dead. Come on now. So I just didn't really believe it or process it or really think that much about it until I saw his body. And that was where it kind of really hit me. And I kind of knew that it would. I kind of knew once I saw my dad's dead body and could see that, like, he dead, I knew that would hit me. So I'd written a whole letter for him that I tucked into his, like, little jacket pocket. And I touched his hand to, like, make sure he was dead. And that was when it really hit me. And that was when I had, like, my first big cry session and really, like, sort of broke down. Because he was definitely dead, you know? And probably a good, like, 4 months after that, I pretty much just kind of moped around and talked about him to people. And I tried to do, like, bits of my life, you know, like I saw friends, I went out, I did such and such, I reapplied for college and dropped out because it felt like something my dad would have wanted me to do, going back to college, not the dropping out part, you know. And I just sort of, I mean, I was grieving. It was just my own unique way as an autistic person. I just needed to spread the memory of him and sort of maintain my own memories of him. Like, it really terrified me for a while, the idea that the more you think of a memory, the more you're actually distorting it. But I thought of, like, memories of my dad over and over to try and, like, cement them into my brain and get them in there. And once I sort of accepted that I wasn't going to forget my dad, I was kind of just okay with it, you know? Like, I still have the odd day where I'm like, I would give anything for a bear hug off my dad right now. I still have the odd day where something really hits me that I'm just not going to see him again. I start crying, you know. But it is the odd day, you know? It's like maybe like a handful of days a year. For the most part, I think my brain is just very logical. So it very much just, they've died, I'm upset. It's been long enough that I'm not really upset anymore and they're just still dead, because that's how death works. And I'm just moving on because that's what you do. And I do think part of that is that I'm sort of, I don't quite want to say I'm an atheist, don't quite want to say I'm agnostic either, but I sort of linger in the realm of, I believe everyone's got energy, and scientifically energy can't be created or destroyed, and thus I do think something happens after death. But personally, I don't believe there's any sort of like heaven. I don't believe I'm going to be reunited with my dad upon my own death, you know? And personally, I find that helpful for me. I think that if I really believed one day I'm going to be reunited with all of my dead loved ones, I think I'd think about them a lot more often. I think I'd be a lot more obsessed about it more often, because it's like, why aren't you here now? I think just accepting for me that my belief is that there's something afterwards, but it's not going to be like that. We're not going to be in human form and have all these memories and stuff. There's just going to be something left of us as the energy that can't be destroyed, you know? And I find that just to be really useful to me. I find that very helpful. I like the thought that my dad isn't in pain, my dad isn't arguing with people, my dad's not depressed anymore. You know, he's not there. His energy still exists within this world. That can never go anywhere. We spread his ashes, and, like, as far as I'm concerned, he's in all of your bloodstreams and shit because he's gone into the water and whatever else. Like, it feels like, and that, this is a bit of a different tangent, but this whole thing is the idea of, like, it does comfort me to feel as though my dad is, and other people in, like, my close life that I've passed are still close to me, because I do feel like their energy's still within the world. And a big thought that helped me when he first passed was that he wasn't really gone, because he's literally alive in my cells, you know? Like, he's my dad. He created what you see in front of you now with a little bit of help from my mum. Well, a lot of help from my mum, really. But, you know, literally part of him lives on within me. Everything that I do is a part of him. A very minor part. I'm not living my life on behalf of my dad. But, you know, a part of him is literally me. And I find that very comforting that, you know, my dad's still leaving a mark on the world through me and through the actions that he did with other people while he was alive. You know, everything's connected is what I'm saying. And I find that to be very comforting and not so much anymore. I don't really think about it all that much anymore, if I'm honest with you. But when he first passed, I found it extremely comforting to think that, you know, he wasn't exactly living on through me. That wasn't the thought. But just a little part of me is a part of him, and it's still here. It'll always be here. Now, I don't know if there's any like studies or numbers, but I'm sure there's got to be other autistic people out there whose families are a bit crap. I've cut off the vast majority of my family. I've realised that I have quite a lot of trauma from most of them. And I mean, half of my family I didn't speak to in the first place, not through choice, just because we're not close, and they're fine. I've got no issue with like the people I don't regularly speak to, you know. But it's been a whole thing basically. And my nan passed like a month ago, I want to say. It was a whole thing because my cousin messaged me being like, "Are you coming to the funeral?" And I was like, "What funeral?" It was a bit terrifying, but yeah, I didn't get on with my nan. In a lot of ways, she was really not a good person, and I felt terrible because there was a little part of me that was kind of glad she was dead. And not in a like, woo, I'm happy, but in a, you know, she was the eldest, like, matriarchal member of my family, and all families, I think, really, for the most part, have generational trauma. So she was, for us, like, the person that started it, you know. I didn't have anyone else above her. I didn't know my great-grandmother. To me, she was the one that was still living, that started the generational trauma that I'm now having to work through and try to deal with. As well as she wasn't fucking nice to me, okay? There were so many times that she'd tell me I'd be so pretty if I just lost some weight, and she'd offer me rewards for losing weight. If you just try a bit. She was very, very mean to me a lot of the time. And it wasn't... And her death just didn't really affect me. I just, you know, I wasn't wishing anything negative on her, but she was an old lady and she was going to die at some point, and I'm just not really that bothered. I'm sorry, but it's true. And I think this is probably something a lot of autistic people have dealt with, when it's someone who, like my boss's dad passed while I was still working for him, and like his dad had worked within the building as well. I'd known his dad like not reasonably well really, just on like a very vague professional level. And it's one of those where I was like, I'm sad he's dead. He was a really nice guy. I'm really sad for my boss, who's, at the time, I also thought was a really great guy. And, you know, it all sucked. But I also, underneath the thought of, like, this sucks for the people involved, as someone who wasn't really involved, I can't say I really cared, you know? Like, I deeply felt for my boss, as someone who had already lost my father. I know how much that fucking sucks. And I was like, that fucking sucks. But beyond that, I was like I thought I'd be upset because I knew the guy. And again, it was exactly like with my nan, where it's like, I'm not happy at all that it's happened, but I'm not sad either. I'm just very, very indifferent. I really don't care, to be completely honest. And it feels very horrible to admit. It feels really nasty to say, because you should care when someone dies. And it's like, sometimes I'm just not close enough to care. And other times, I'm too close to care, you know? You know, I think grieving is just, and mourning and death and losing people is one of those things that just really affects neurodivergent people differently. And obviously, I'm only speaking from an autistic perspective. But from my point of view, I think that, you know, for a lot of neurotypicals, you see them say, like, death doesn't make sense. And you know, I respect that. I'd never tell someone they're wrong if they don't feel like death makes sense. I think everyone has to process and grieve differently. But for me, I'm very much like, well, it does make sense. We're born in these little human flesh carcasses, and we get to go about our lives, and they're quite delicate and weak. And at some point, it's either going to age out of working, or something horrible's going to happen and make it stop working. And that's logic to me, you know, that just makes sense. And I think, again, a lot of people question, like, but what's after death? What happens? And again, I feel like it's quite obvious, and, you know, not in the way of, like, I know what happens after death. I know what kind of, like, state I'll be in. But I don't think it's, like, a conscious state of being. And I feel like I'm fairly settled in my belief of it, you know? So I don't feel confusion over that. I don't feel like that doesn't make sense. It all very much sits okay with me. You know, not to be someone that's like, I've figured out death, but I just feel like I've lost quite a lot of people, and I've watched a lot of content about death, you know, like the mortician lady, Caitlin. things like that, a lot of true crime, a lot of cave disasters, disaster videos. You know, I've just sort of acquaintanced myself with death, and it doesn't really bother me much. You know, I don't want to die, well, most of the time, but processing and losing people, and, you know, it always sucks. But, you know, like, losing someone that you love is never going to be easy. You know, I'm not saying I've, like, figured out death, so I'm not going to be upset if someone I love dies. Fingers crossed they don't. Touch wood, they don't. Sorry, that's my OCD, that I still can't get diagnosed. I lost my train of thought then, because I had, like, all of the thoughts of, like, oh no, I've just wished it into existence. Yeah, it's still, you know, it hits me, and it's very upsetting, and I'll cry a lot, and I definitely go through, like, a grieving and mourning process, but it's definitely not, like, the steps of grieving that you're told about. And, you know, like, I was offered grief counselling, and I was like, I literally don't know what I'd say, because I'm doing perfectly fine just telling my few close friends memories of my dad. I'm doing okay. Like, I don't see how they'd help me through this. I feel fine. Like, very, very sad. I was really fucking sad because my dad had died, but, like, I was as sad as you would be when your dad dies, you know. I was grieving and mourning in my own way just fine. I didn't feel like I needed that outside help, and I don't think it would have been useful to me as a neurodivergent person. If anything, I honestly find it harder when pets and animals die, because they don't have the option of being an asshole. You know, it's the whole thing of, like, it's their instinct. It's not them making the conscious choice of, I'm gonna fuck you up. No animal can be truly evil or bad or shitty in reality. Like, they just can't. So I feel really sad when animals and people's pets die. I really feel that, actually. Like, I can see someone's cat died on Twitter that I don't even follow, and I'll be like, I'll have tears in my eyes for them, because that sucks so much. And they're such a precious little angel soul. But people really vary for me. And I think I've just sort of settled in and gotten comfortable with the fact that people die. And I don't really know what happens afterwards, and that's just how it be. This is a topic I would, again, as always, I love getting comments, okay? I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. And, you know, like, you don't have to trauma dump on me, but I'm open to you trauma dumping on me with your experiences and what you've been through. I don't think that things should be taboo, quite frankly, or out of bounds. And I'm nervous about uploading a video where I basically exclaim, I don't give a fuck that my nan died. But if more people were honest about it, I probably wouldn't feel as bad about it. So whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And I'll see you again in a couple of days.